Okay, now I'm going to unpack the second standard I chose for this activity. Again, I chose a WIDA standard, and this is a grades 3 to 5 standard, corresponding to the standard for the language of science. And it's from the formative framework for reading. And again, it's level 3, which is an appropriate level for my grade 3 students. The standard is sequence descriptive sentences and pictures to illustrate forms of conservation, for example, the recycling process. Again, I'm going to look first for the contents or the nouns. I see here forms of conservation. So this is the content, what we're going to be looking at. And now I want to find the skills that are going to be applied to this content. So I see here the verb illustrate. Students are going to be able to illustrate forms of conservation. I see another verb here, sequence. So they're going to be able to illustrate forms of conservation, and they're going to do that by sequencing. And here, we could call it a context, or we could call it the material that's going to be sequenced in order to illustrate. And students are going to sequence descriptive sentences and pictures. So actually there are two parts to this standard, two things that students will need to be able to do. The first one is they will be able to sequence descriptive sentences to illustrate forms of conservation, and they will also be able to sequence pictures to illustrate forms of conservation. Again, I came up with a couple of big ideas. They're not present in the standard itself, but can be used to develop a unit around this standard. The first one is that the Earth has limited resources that need to be conserved. Before children can really appreciate the importance of conservation, they need to understand that the Earth has finite resources. And the second is that people have developed different processes for conserving resources. Some of the skills that students will need to meet this standard include being able to understand and use language related to conservation, being able to understand and use language for sequencing. This isn't explicitly spelled out in the standards. Actually, they could technically meet the standard without using sequencing words, but as an ESL teacher, I consider it to be really important that they connect those elements in a useful way by using these connecting words. So they should learn sequencing words like first, then, after, finally, or last. And the last skill is they need to be able to understand and sequence the steps involved in a conservation method.